It's been a couple months, so let's talk about what I've read. Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel, This Story Ain't Over. It has been a couple months now since I last gave you a reading wrap up, so it is time to tell you what I read in September and October. Honestly, both months were pretty busy for me because I was prepping for my big vacation trip to the UK and Paris in September, and then once I was back from the trip in October, I was just like dealing with all of the backlog of work that I had to do. So I'm finally feeling a little bit more settled now that Halloween is over, now that we're into the last couple months of the year. And despite it all, I did manage to read a few books, and I do want to remind all of you that no matter how much you're reading, you are still a reader, you are still valid, so don't worry if you were only able to read like one book this month or only able to read half a book this month. Like, that's okay. We all read at our own paces, we all have our own life things going on, and that is okay. Okay, now on to what I actually read in September and October. The first book that I managed to finish was Rouge by Mona Awad. I have talked about this book a couple times in different recommendation videos and TBR videos. This is Mona Awad's newest book, Rouge, and she has written two books before, Bunny and All's Well. I loved both of those books, but I do think after having read this one, I personally loved Bunny and All's Well a little bit more. I think I like All's Well the best. This one was still good, it just didn't really hit all the notes that I was hoping for, and I feel like it just lacked something extra that I feel like Bunny and All's Well had. If you've ever read a Mona Awad book, then you know that her books go in super weird directions and they are a little confusing. You kind of have to just suspend your disbelief and just roll with it. This one was no different, but I do feel like this one was a little bit more on the confusing side than her previous two books. Essentially, this follows our main character who is sort of obsessed with beauty and like skincare routines and trying to be her most beautiful self. When her mother dies, she is forced to like go back to her home in California and, you know, pack up her mom's stuff and deal with like her dress shop, I think. She is sort of falling into this weird situation where she is getting like these treatments at this strange place, and there's a lot of like gothic and creepy things going on, and you are not really sure if she is in the right state of mind for most of the book. One of the blurbs on the back of this book describes it as a fever dream, and I definitely feel like it is that. It's a fever dream of a fairy tale. It's a little bit on the gothic side, but I do feel like it just veers a little bit too much in the fever dream direction for my taste, and I personally just wanted something with a little bit more direction. Regardless though, I did really love the like examination of the mother-daughter relationship and their estranged relationship. And one thing I loved even more and that I wish had been explored a lot more was the idea of race and how that plays into beauty and beauty standards. So the main character in the book is actually biracial and the mother is white. And they speak of the main character having like slightly darker skin and how she's sort of seeking fairer skin to be more like her mother, to be more beautiful. And I think the discussion of beauty is quite interesting when it comes to women of color who are held to different beauty standards than other people and who are often told that they need to aspire to white beauty standards. So that was an aspect of the book, but I do feel like it was like barely touched upon. Like it was mentioned a few places here and there, but I do feel like it could have been dug into a little bit more, and I probably would have liked that a lot. Last thing I'll say is that I did listen to the audiobook for this one, so that may have contributed to my confusion along the way, so take what I said with a grain of salt. I do think that if you enjoyed Mona Awad's previous books, you'll probably enjoy this one, like at bare minimum, I think a 3. So yeah, for me, this one was about a 3.5 stars. Enjoyable, but not my favorite. Alright, the next book that I finished in the past couple of months was Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. I was actually listening to the audiobook and also reading the ebook on my e-reader while I was on vacation, and I read it on a couple train rides, and it was actually quite a quick read, so that was nice. This author has another book called The Hacienda. That was their debut novel, and I've heard amazing things about that book, but I decided to just pick up this one kind of on a whim because I had the audiobook from the library and I was just feeling vampires. I wanted something vampire-y. I have to say, guys, this one is one of those books that you should not go into with the expectations of like vampires as you traditionally know them and as we know them in a lot of like books and TV shows, because I feel like the author approached vampires and the idea of them in a very different way. It's not to say that it was bad, it just was different from what I was expecting, so that did lead to a little bit of disappointment when I went into the book. But regardless of that, this one had some really great atmosphere and spookiness to it, and it also has a little bit of like a forbidden romance situation going on. Essentially, this book is set in the 1840s in Mexico along the Texas-Mexico border, and it follows two main characters who are from like different classes in their community, and the two of them have this really strong like friendship and bond as children. And when the girl gets attacked by some sort of creature while she's with him, he assumes that she's dead because of something that someone told him, and so he leaves the community in the ranchero, I think it's called, and she stays and she thinks that he like abandoned her. And so we're meeting them many years later when the United States is trying to invade Mexico in 1846, and he is returning to the community to fight with them against the, Americans. So while this book does have vampires, I feel like the focus of it really isn't on the vampires themselves. It's more on the sort of mystery of the vampires and also the romance between the two characters and a bit of the political situation going on. I do feel like the romance was the main focus, and that was something that was a little bit disappointing for me because I actually wanted more of the other stuff. Like, I wanted more of the politics, I wanted more of the vampires, but I got more of the romance, which in my opinion wasn't my favorite, to be honest. I didn't really see the chemistry between the characters all that much. Like, I saw the whole pining after each other bit, but I did find the main girl character a little bit annoying in the sense that she was like trying very hard to be like angry at him. I don't know, it just wasn't really vibing with me. That's not to say she isn't a great character in her own right, but I think the way that the two of them show up in the relationship for each other and like in their fight for each other wasn't really what I thought to be romantic. I'm gonna leave it at that. I don't want to spoil anything, but I do feel like, if I was one of the people in this like romantic situation, the way that the other person acted like was not enough for me. Aside from that though, the writing for this one was actually very atmospheric and spooky, and I just really loved the overall like language and vibe. And the author had a really great way of capturing the main guy character's pining voice. Like, there was just something so aching about it, and I love that. With that said, I do have one quote from this book that I really enjoyed and that I'm gonna read to you. It goes, "A strangeness, a ripple of unease, an understanding, though timid at first, that perhaps there is some truth to the stories of blood-hungry beasts and river ghosts that abuelas on the rancho spun to keep children close to home after sunset. A sense that there was a reason to watch one's back when shadows grew long." That's just a little taste of like the atmospheric writing and like a little bit of the spookiness coming to life in this book. I do feel like it was nice for spooky season. I just wish we had more vampires. All right, one of the next books that I was reading while on vacation was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I didn't actually finish my reread of this while on vacation, and I still have yet to finish it, but I did want to mention it as like something I read in the past couple months because I got about halfway through my reread, and guys, it's just so satisfying to reread Jane Austen because there's just something about the way she writes, the way she talks about characters, the just general, I don't know, like Regency era vibe that gets me. I was reading this while I was in Paris and while I was in London, and it was just such a vibe. Like, I just felt so, I don't know, like in a different era. I felt like I was romanticizing my life, and it just felt so cool. The last time I reread Pride and Prejudice was, I think, a few years ago, so it's been a while, and the first time I read it was actually in high school. So I have a lot of like fond feelings around this book, especially because I also really love the 2005 adaptation of the book. And so when I was just like remembering what actually happens in the book, I was thinking mostly of the movie because I rewatch that all the time. But rereading it again, it was nice to remember all the details that are not in the movie and like how things are a little bit simplified for the movie. But overall, I just like loved reading about Darcy and Elizabeth and just like their personalities and characters and how they come across in the book, and how their relationship is just so filled with like these misunderstandings, but not in like a miscommunication annoying way, more in like a really, realistic way, in the way that you might misunderstand someone's character based off of like just the face value of what you're seeing and what you don't know about them. Anyways, this was just a really nice cozy read for my vacation, and I do hope to finish the reread at some point later this year. All right, on to a book that is perhaps a new favorite, actually definitely a new favorite for the year, and perhaps maybe even my favorite book of the year. Who knows? I don't know. We're gonna find out. I do feel like there's some other contenders for favorite book of the year, but this one is a very strong one. And that book is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. I never thought that this book would impress me the way that it did. And I think maybe it impressed me because I went into it with very low expectations. But essentially, I had this book on ebook on my e-reader for months because I had been seeing it around like Bookstagram. And I knew it was one of those like literary fiction, contemporary fictions that have sort of like the hot sad girl vibe to them. And I was like, yeah, I want to read this at some point, but I don't think it's going to be that good. So I kind of put it off. And so I was on vacation, and I think I was in like Bath or maybe on the train ride to Paris, and I started this book. And my God, guys, the chokehold that this book had on me in the couple weeks that I was on vacation, it's just insane. I was so obsessed with this book, and there was just something about it that hit me so deep, and I related to so many parts of it. And I do think it's just generally a book that's really, really well written, and you can tell that the author has gone through some sort of like writing training because like her writing was so freaking good. She not only had like incredible and interesting narration, but also some really great and witty dialogue. This book follows two main characters, Cleo and Frank, Cleopatra and Frankenstein, who meet after this like New Year's Eve party and sort of hit it off. We jump to like many months later when they get married very suddenly to help Cleo with her like visa because she's from the UK. And from there we follow them for like the subsequent months of their relationship and sort of marriage in New York and how everything sort of starts to fall apart. Now, besides the two main characters, Cleo and Frank, we also follow a lot of their friends and like people around them that get involved in this sticky situation, and we actually take their perspective. The way that the author wrote the different perspectives was just so incredible to me because she had such a great grasp of portraying the characters based off of how they were feeling and how they viewed each other. So you view Cleo in one way when she's the one narrating, but then you also view her in a completely different way when you are hearing about her from like the perspective of her best friend. Not only that, the book was just like so freaking messy and like complicated. Like these characters get so intertwined and interwoven with each other's lives. It just becomes this very sticky, messy situation, and each of them is also just going through some really intense like mental health struggles as well. And I think the mental health rep in this book and also the addiction rep in this book was just incredible. Like I have never read something that realistic and just that felt so on point for how it really feels to be like depressed or to feel anxiety or to be on the verge of suicide. There's also a lot of talk of like loneliness, which is just such an interesting concept when you consider the fact that the characters are all based in New York, this city that is full of people, and yet they all feel alone in some way. I could go on and on about this book, but it was just like so freaking fantastic. Like it was so well written in my opinion, and I just related so hard to so many aspects of it. And it just had that element of like really flawed characters that make mistakes and, you know, learn lessons and don't have all the answers by the end, which is something that I just love in books. Like I love ambiguous endings. I love bittersweet endings. I love books that don't try to shove a message down your throat. They're just providing you with these characters and how they're moving through their lives, and you are drawing your inferences from there, but you're also sort of guided through it. Anyways, let me read some quotes from this book for you guys so you can just experience how well written this is. The first one goes, "We want because we're wanting, both senses of the word, the lacking and the longing, all rolled into one. The more you find yourself wanting, the more you want." Another one goes, "I don't understand this obsession with happiness," she said. "Happiness is like the Hollywood sign. It's big, it's unattainable, and even if you do make it up there, what's there to do but come back down?" Another one that's really short that I think is just such a beautiful like metaphor is, "He became the hook upon which she hung her whole self." This idea of just like losing yourself completely in another person and losing your sense of self. And then the last one that I think just really hit me and just is so indicative of how I'm feeling right now as a, adulting person is it struck her that adult life was endlessly harsh and exciting, something to be overwhelmed by again and again, like a wave beating her down as she tried to stand. What a quote. What a series of quotes. I just loved this book, and the way that it's sort of this like homage to growing up, to being an adult, to finding your place in a world that, has really kicked you down, and along the way dealing with the mental health struggles that go along with it. I love this book. It's definitely a new favorite, and yeah, I just can't get over it, and I don't know, I want more, but I also like love this in its entirety and how it ended and like just the way it is. On a completely different note, the next book that I finished was actually a novella, and it's called Minor Detail by Adenia Shibli. This is by a Palestinian author, and it takes sort of two timelines and perspectives, and the first one is set in 1949, a year after the Nakba and the historical event when the Israeli settler colony displaced thousands, almost 1 million Palestinians from their homes and massacred them. And in the book we follow this Israeli soldier who ultimately commits this very heinous crime, and that is about half of the novella. And so the other half of the novella actually follows this young woman in Ramallah, which is another part of Palestine, and I believe her part is set in the 1990s, but I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me. But she essentially comes across this article in a newspaper about this young woman in 1949 who was gang raped, killed, and buried in the sand by these Israeli soldiers. And so she gets sort of hung up on this report, and also by the minor detail that this woman was brutally raped and killed on the same day that she was born. And so she kind of becomes fascinated and, obsessed with this detail and wants to know more about this woman, and decides to go on this journey to find out more about her. And the one thing that you should know about this book is that, you already know like the awful thing that has happened even before picking up the book usually. Even when you're in that first half of the book, reading from the Israeli soldier's perspective, you know that this awful thing's gonna come. And I think the way that the author approaches it and writes it is just so freaking incredible and just so chilling. It is a book that is meant to make you feel uncomfortable and make you sit with that feeling and understand like the absolute atrocities that have happened to Palestinian people. The writing just has like so much subtext to it, and also delves into so many aspects of Palestinian lives, like even up to now, of this restriction of movement. The main character in the second part of the book talks about how she had to like get someone else's identity card so that she can move from like area A to like area B, because she's not allowed to move through these different areas, but like one of her friends is able to. And it's just like the different restrictions that are placed on Palestinians is just so freaking ridiculous and should not be happening. But then on the other side, there's also this like almost mundane like reporting of these constant bombings, and the main character being so desensitized to the idea of knowing that somewhere around her there's going to be someone bombed or some building bombed, and she's just so used to it. And it's just this like really heartbreaking and difficult book to read, I think, but it's such an important one, and I'm so glad I picked it up. I talked about this in my last video, but please call your reps, speak up, share information about Palestine, about Gaza. Make sure that we're not giving into the white Western media tale that wants to fund the bombing of literal civilians and wants to hold up this settler colony of Israel, which is essentially colonizing people and committing genocide as we speak. Please consider donating as well. I'll leave links down below. But yeah, ultimately, please like protest, call your reps. Like, we need to do the most we can to call for ceasefire and stop what's happening. All right, on a related note, the next book that I picked up and that I'm currently still in the middle of reading is The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida by Shehan Karunatkala. The reason I say that this is a bit related to Minor Detail is because this book essentially follows our main character, Mali Almeida, who is this closeted gay man and also war photographer, and we're following him as a ghost in I think 1990, don't quote me on the year, and essentially he is finding himself in this like weird afterlife situation, and is being told that he needs to like go into the light and complete these different tasks before he finishes up his 7 moons, which is like the allotted time that he has. But poor Mali doesn't remember how he died, although he remembers like other things about his life. And one of the things that he suspects is that there was some foul play in his death. And so he sort of ends up on this like weird little journey following like his friends and family and people around him as they try to figure out, you know, what happened to him. And as he tries to figure out, you know, who killed him. Now, with all of that said, this book is also set against the backdrop of the Sri Lankan Civil War and also touches specifically on the 1983 massacres of Tamils by, you know, these giant mobs in Sri Lanka. It was a targeted genocide and it was helped by the military and the government, and essentially our main character Mali, who is this war photographer, he has managed to sort of play all the sides in a way. He is part Sinhalese, he's part Tamil and Burgher, and he has taken photos of different events during the Civil War, and those photos end up being very valuable things in trying to prove that the government and military were involved with these massacres. It was just so interesting the way that I was like picking this up as everything around the world right now was going on, and just seeing like the parallels between like my own history, you know, my parents' own history, and what is going on now, and this idea that like genocide just continues to happen, that, you know, these awful people are still out there and doing these things. Like, it was just breaking my heart, really. And one thing that was also interesting to me was that the book very, very briefly touches upon the fact that the Israeli government provided weapons, military equipment to the Sri Lankan army to help them commit genocide against Tamil people. And so everything just ended up being very full circle and was honestly just driving me a little bit insane. This book touches on a lot of history, a lot of politics, and also talks about things in some supernatural lenses as well and superstitious lenses as well, given that this is from, you know, a Sri Lankan background, and, you know, given that the character is like a ghost and there's all this supernatural stuff going on. But one of the things that was mentioned was this idea of like 1948 being this cursed year. It's the year that Sri Lanka became independent. It was independent as Ceylon first, and it's also the year that, you know, apartheid South Africa came to be, and it's also when the Nakba occurred in Palestine and the settler colony of Israel was created. And it's just this idea of like colonialism having its claws in all of these horrible things that have happened in the last like several decades, and how we are still dealing with these effects and still watching genocide happen in our current day. And it was just, yeah, everything was kind of coming together, and I was just like having a really hard moment. But yeah, this book is really, really incredible. It not only touches upon like the history of Sri Lanka and like the political aspects of it, but it also touches upon like, you know, queerness, and it's also a little bit funny in some cases. It uses a very like dark and dry humor, which I absolutely love. And the book is also told in second person, which is something that I've never seen happen for a full entire novel. So essentially the narration is addressed as like, you are dead and, you know, you were doing this and yada, 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 but it's really talking about Mali, the character, but you were sort of forcibly put even further into his shoes and into this situation. And I think it was just a really interesting way of writing the book, and I honestly really, really loved it. Overall, this book is just like comic, but also macabre and a little bit angry, and just hits on so many things that I just really, really loved. It's like both really complicated and a little bit convoluted, but it's also just like so goddamn clear what's going on here, and it's just done so, so well. I feel like this is one of those books that like once you really get into it, you like do not want to stop reading because you just want to know what's going to happen next, both with like the mystery with Mali's death, but also just like how the political things are going to unfold. Even if you know the history, like just watching it unfold in like the fictional sense is just really interesting, and I am just honestly hooked. With that said, I want to read you a few quotes from the book that I really, really love. The first one goes, "You know why the battle of good versus evil is so one-sided, Malin? Because evil is better organized, better equipped, and better paid. It is not monsters or yakas or demons we should fear. Organized collectives of evildoers who think they are performing the work of the righteous. That is what should make us shudder." I love this quote because it really just touches on what's going on right now. Like, the settler colony of Israel is just so perfectly funded by the US government, by these Western governments, and by these different companies and corporations who are just pouring their money into their military and the literal genocide of Palestinians. And the settler colony of Israel has just managed to like sink its claws into every aspect of media and control the narrative so well. Like, so many of these war photographers and reporters have been killed during all of the conflict that's been going on, but also a lot of people in the West who have been talking about what has been going on and expressing any support for Palestine have also been silenced by the organizations that they work for or the people around them or just by general public opinion. And it's just so freaking wild to me how well equipped and organized they've become and primed they've become to commit this evil. The next quote goes, "She ranted about how evil doesn't know it is evil, like the mad don't know they're insane. That America doesn't think it has invaded too many democracies and killed too many innocents. That we shouldn't let them slaughter like the worst tyrants and drop bombs on children. That there's nothing exceptional about a country built on genocide and the backs of slaves." I feel like this one's pretty straightforward, but yeah, just the way that the US is conducting itself right now and funding genocide is just unspeakable and awful. And yeah, please freaking call your reps, guys. And then the last quote is one that I think just taps into a little bit of the mental health struggle going on with Mali, and that goes, "The sweetest thing about oblivion is that it cannot be felt." This is something that he, says, or that gets narrated when he's talking about like the afterlife and how he's a ghost and whatever, and how he just wants to like go into oblivion, move on. Like, he doesn't want to see everything going on in the real world, and now that he's dead, like, he just wants to have it all end. And I think that's generally a feeling that comes up in depression and, when you reach this point when the real world just becomes so freaking awful that you don't know what to do. Anyways, I didn't want to make this a really heavy video, but I think it kind of went there. But I think it's necessary and we need to talk about these things. And I feel like that is what fiction is for also. Like, it's not just to escape, it's also to reveal truths about our real world and get us to empathize with other people and other perspectives and care generally about the world. Like, you are not weak for feeling bad about this entire situation, for feeling sad, for feeling angry and upset that you can't do more. Like, that is a sign that you are a feeling, empathetic human being and, you are trying your best. So I really hope that those of you who are watching this video will please go to the resources below, call your reps, email your reps, go to protests, be safe, but just like, please, let's show up for the people around the world who need us. Anyways, with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on all these books that I've read recently in September and October. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them, and if your thoughts on any of them are similar or different to mine, I would love to discuss down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!